Every time you slide into a car, turn the key, and feel it move forward without thinking about gears, clutches, or timing. You are relying on the work of a man the world never taught you to remember. Modern car technology exists because of him. Entire cities, industries, and daily routines depend on an idea he solved nearly a century ago. Yet his name is absent from textbooks, museums, and automotive history. What they didn't know, or chose not to say, is that one forgotten black engineer quietly changed how humanity moves. Before his invention, driving was a battle. Early automobiles demanded strength, precision, and constant attention. One mistake meant a stalled engine, shattered gears, or a deadly accident. Cars were loud, violent machines that punished inexperience. Millions were locked out of driving, simply because the technology was too unforgiving. Engineers searched for answers, but progress was slow, limited, and expensive. Then, in the middle of segregated America, far from corporate laboratories, a single mind approached the problem differently. In 1932, a self-taught inventor filed a patent that challenged the very relationship between humans and machines. He believed the car should think for itself, that gears should change automatically, that driving should be smooth, safe, and accessible. It was a radical idea, one that would later generate billions of dollars and define the modern automobile. Yet as companies adopted, refined, and profited from this concept, the man behind it faded into silence. What they didn't know was that every effortless acceleration, every smooth shift on today's highways carries the fingerprint of a genius history buried. This is not just a story about invention. It is a story about erasure, power, and the cost of forgetting the people who built the world we live in. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world stood on the edge of mechanical transformation. Cities expanded outward in steel and smoke. Factories roared day and night. Horses still crowded the streets. But a new sound began to cut through the noise, the rattle of early automobiles. These machines promised freedom, speed, and progress. Yet they were anything but friendly. Driving required physical strength, perfect timing, and an intimate understanding of grinding metal and roaring engines. Roads were unpaved. Breakdowns were constant. A single mistake at the gear lever could destroy an engine or send a car lurching into chaos. In the 1910s and 1920s, automobiles were not built for ordinary people. They were designed by engineers for engineers. Gear shifting demanded both hands, sharp reflexes, and nerves of steel. Drivers memorized sequences of clutch control, throttle adjustment, and lever movement. New drivers stalled in traffic. Accidents piled up. Many simply gave up. The car, instead of liberating society, became a symbol of frustration and danger. Manufacturers knew the problem, but solving it meant rethinking how humans interacted with machines, not just improving horsepower or speed. At the same time, America itself was divided. Innovation flourished, but opportunity did not. Segregation shaped every institution, from universities to patent offices. Black inventors were often forced to work alone, without funding, laboratories, or public recognition. Their ideas were scrutinized more harshly, adopted more quietly, and credited less often. Progress moved forward, but history kept selective records of who deserved to be remembered. This was the world taking shape as automobiles spread across the nation. A world desperate for a solution that would make driving safer and simpler. A world that did not yet realize its future would be altered not by a famous industrialist, but by an overlooked engineer, whose ideas would soon challenge everything drivers believed about control, machines, and motion. Richard Bowie Spikes was born in 1878 into a family where invention was not a luxury, but a way of survival. His father was a skilled craftsman, and from an early age, Spikes learned to observe how tools worked, how machines failed, and how small changes could produce powerful results. Formal engineering schools were largely closed to black Americans at the turn of the century, so Spikes educated himself. He studied mechanical systems by dismantling them, rebuilding them, and improving them with his own hands. Curiosity became his classroom. Persistence became his credential. As a young man, Spikes moved through workshops, rail yards, and industrial spaces. absorbing knowledge wherever he could find it. He saw inefficiency everywhere: barber clippers that overheated, trolley systems that wasted energy, railroad switches that endangered workers. Instead of accepting these flaws, he redesigned them. One by one, he filed patents for practical improvements that solved real-world problems. His inventions were not theoretical. They were built to be used, to last, and to protect human life. Yet Spikes worked in isolation, while white inventors were welcomed into corporate laboratories and backed by investors. He navigated a system that offered little support and even less recognition. Manufacturers were willing to buy his ideas, but rarely to celebrate his name. Still, he persisted. Each patent strengthened his reputation among those who quietly relied on his work. Each design refined his understanding of how humans interacted with machines. By the time automobiles began flooding American streets, Spikes had already developed a reputation as a problem solver. He understood mechanics not as abstract equations, but as living systems shaped by human behavior. He did not ask how drivers could be trained to master machines. He asked how machines could be redesigned to serve people. That mindset would soon lead him toward a problem that frustrated millions and would ultimately place him at the center of one of the most transformative, yet least acknowledged, innovations in modern transportation history. As automobiles became more common in the 1920s, the flaws in their design could no longer be ignored. Traffic increased, speeds rose, and with them came stalled engines, stripped gears, and mounting accidents. Newspapers reported collisions caused not by recklessness, but by mechanical failure and driver confusion. Manufacturers faced a growing crisis. The car was spreading faster than the average person could learn to control it. What they didn't know was that the solution would not come from bigger engines or stronger parts, but from rethinking control itself. Richard Spikes watched this chaos closely. He listened to drivers complain. He observed engines strain under improper shifting. He saw how fear replaced confidence behind the wheel. To him, the problem was obvious. Humans were being asked to perform tasks better suited for machines. Gear timing demanded precision beyond what most drivers could deliver consistently. Spikes began experimenting in his workshop, sketching mechanisms that could sense engine, speed, and road conditions without human input. Each attempt brought setbacks. Early prototypes were bulky. Parts wore down quickly. Manufacturers dismissed the idea as unrealistic. What they didn't know was that Spikes was refining something far more radical than convenience. He was redefining the relationship between driver and machine. As months turned into years, his designs grew more elegant. Gears responded automatically. Transitions became smoother. The violent jerks that plagued early cars faded into controlled motion. Tension built as Spikes prepared to file his patent. He understood the risk. Exposing the idea too early meant losing control of it. Waiting too long meant being overtaken by larger companies. In 1932, he made his move. His patent described a system that allowed vehicles to change gears automatically, reducing strain on engines and eliminating the need for constant driver intervention. It was a direct challenge to the status quo. What they didn't know was that this quiet filing marked a turning point. While corporations debated feasibility, the future of driving had already been drawn on paper by a man working alone, setting the stage for a revolution the world would soon embrace, without ever learning his name. The breakthrough came quietly, and so did the erasure. In 1932, Richard Spikes secured his patent for an automatic gear shifting system, a document that proved the concept worked and that the future of driving no longer required human struggle. But what followed was not recognition. It was absorption. Large manufacturers studied the idea, adapted its principles, and folded them into their own research without elevating the man who originated it. What they didn't know, or refused to acknowledge, was how complete the disappearance would become. As the 1930s turned into the 1940s, major automotive companies introduced increasingly sophisticated automatic transmissions. Hydraulic controls, torque converters, and smoother transitions entered the market. Advertisements celebrated innovation, ease, and freedom. Yet nowhere in the promotional materials did the name Richard Spikes appear. His foundational ideas were present, but his identity was absent. History was being rewritten in real time, credit redistributed to institutions instead of individuals, especially when those individuals did not fit the image of celebrated American inventors. The darker truth was not that Spikes failed. It was that he succeeded too early, and in a society unwilling to amplify black achievement. His patents were legally protected, yet socially ignored. Financial rewards were limited. Public acclaim never arrived. His work became invisible infrastructure, essential but unacknowledged. What they didn't know was that the convenience being sold as modern luxury was rooted in innovation, born from exclusion and perseverance. This pattern extended beyond automobiles. Again and again, black inventors shaped industries while watching their contributions fade behind corporate names. Spikes' story was not an exception. It was a symptom, a system that harvested brilliance while erasing origin. By the time automatic transmissions became standard, the narrative was set. The revolution had happened, but its architect had been quietly written out of the story, leaving behind a truth buried beneath steel, motion, and silence. The impact of Richard Spikes' work unfolded on a massive scale. Even as his name remained hidden, automatic transmissions transformed, driving from a technical skill into an everyday activity. Elderly drivers, new drivers, and people once excluded by the physical demands of manual shifting could now operate vehicles with confidence. Traffic flowed more smoothly. Engines lasted longer. Accidents caused by stalling and gear failure declined. Entire populations became mobile in ways previously impossible. What they didn't know was that this freedom traced back to a man history refused to celebrate. Cities expanded outward as commuting became easier. Suburbs grew. Highways multiplied. The automobile industry exploded into a global economic force worth trillions of dollars. Delivery systems, emergency services, and public infrastructure were redesigned around the assumption that driving could be effortless. Automatic transmission became a selling point, then an expectation, then a standard. Meanwhile, Spikes continued working in relative obscurity, his inventions shaping lives he would never meet. Beyond automobiles, his mind kept solving problems. He developed improvements to braking systems, railroad safety mechanisms, and even a beer dispensing system that kept beverages fresher, a design still used decades later. Despite declining eyesight in his later years, he refused to stop creating. He worked with assistants, dictated ideas, and refined designs long after recognition should have arrived. What they didn't know was that perseverance itself had become part of his legacy. The long-term consequence was not just technological advancement, but historical imbalance. Generations learned simplified stories of innovation that excluded contributors like Spikes. This absence shaped who society believed could be an inventor, an engineer, a visionary. His erasure narrowed imagination itself. Yet the machines told a different story. Every smooth shift, every effortless drive contradicted the silence around his name. The world moved forward powered by his ideas, even as it forgot the man who set them in motion. Richard Bowie Spikes died in 1962, long before the world fully understood how deeply his ideas were embedded in everyday life. By then, automatic transmissions were no longer experimental. They were becoming standard. Millions of drivers relied on technology, built upon principles he had envisioned decades earlier. Roads stretched farther, cities pulsed with motion, and still his name remained largely unspoken. What they didn't know was how much of modern convenience rested on a single, overlooked mind. His story forces a reckoning with how history chooses its heroes. Innovation is often credited to corporations and famous figures, while the individuals who laid the groundwork disappear into footnotes or vanish entirely. Spikes reminds us that progress is rarely the result of one celebrated moment, but of countless unseen acts of brilliance. He did not invent for fame. He invented because he believed machines should serve people, not intimidate them. As we move deeper into an age of electric and autonomous vehicles, the philosophy Spikes championed remains central: automation, safety, accessibility, the idea that technology should think on behalf of humans to improve life. These principles did not begin in Silicon Valley or modern research labs. They began in workshops, in isolation, driven by necessity and imagination. His work forms part of the foundation beneath today's most advanced transportation systems. The tragedy is not only that Richard Spikes was forgotten, but that his absence shaped what society believed was possible. Honoring him is more than correcting a name in history. It is expanding the story of who builds the future. So the next time a car shifts smoothly beneath you, consider the unseen architect behind that motion. Ask why his name was erased. Ask how many others shared his fate. And ask yourself what history might look like if we finally told the whole story.